I always go by before Bloomberg and after Bloomberg. So before Bloomberg, budgets were controlled centrally. They were controlled by district offices. Schools were given money to operate. And basically principals had no control of funding. You were given small amounts maybe to buy some materials and stuff for your school. But beyond that, all the funding was done at the district level. Fair student funding, when they designed it, they basically broke down the structures at central and at the district level, and they pushed the money out to schools. So the real difference with fair student funding was the idea of how to actually equitably distribute funds. And what they did was they looked at how they could support schools that needed additional funding, right? So what they did was they looked at average teacher salary, and they said, you know, where there is a lower salary in schools and areas where it's harder to keep staff, you know, those were the harder to staff schools. In those areas, what they did was they captured the average teacher salary, and they found that those salaries were much lower than in areas where staff stayed forever, you know, and they had more senior staffs. Okay. And when they looked at that, it kind of matched up pretty well with the economics of the city, right? So what you had was the wealthier neighborhoods and stuff. The tendency was that the schools had staff that was there longer. So what they did was they said, this is a way that we could send and we could promote equity within the system. We're going to fund every school at a citywide average teacher salary, but we're going to charge the schools at their average. So every year the city captures, I'm not sure exactly when, sometimes February, March, before they do the budget, your average teacher salary off of your T of O. So everybody who's on your T of O for that year, they add up the salaries and they divide by the number of teachers and they get your average. So in the beginning, it worked very well. So those schools that were in hard to staff areas, their money went a lot further, right? So if the city's funding you at $90,000 for a teacher and you're being charged on your Galaxy at $60,000, you're going to have a lot of extra money. And the city could justify that because if you have new staff and a lot of turnover, you need coaches, you need professional development, right? If you have a very senior staff, you don't need those things the same way. So when fair student funding came out, the one thing we learned about fair student funding was it really wasn't all that fair. What they could not predict and they couldn't see was charter schools. So unfortunately, charter schools, you know, from the time that Bloomberg started to now have grown exponentially across the city. And what that does is if you're surrounded by charter schools, they take students. And as they take students, it forces you to access teachers. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in this workshop. And we all know that it's last in, first out. Right. So what ends up happening is our lowest paid teachers are accessed out and our average teacher's salary jumps up. So in some of the hardest to staff areas in the city, we have some of the highest average teacher salaries. And those schools are really being squeezed. You know, the belief always was that in those affluent areas, PTAs could raise money, you know, schools could raise money for funding. And now, unfortunately, you know, the system, you know, because of the charter school growth has kind of become a little broken. Okay, so if you're sitting there and you've been doing a lot of accessing, you're going to find out as we go through this workshop why you're in as much trouble as you're in. Okay, so we're going to keep moving through this. I can move through this. Okay, so we talked about the design. The reality is that now we have a little bit of a upside down system because we have so many schools that are in harder to staff areas that are struggling to operate. A lot of the schools are going for appeals just to get the money to operate. I'm sure some of you sitting here are in our appeal schools. The campaign for fiscal equity was the piece from the state where the state was, you know, because New York City has so much of its own funding, and there are these rural areas throughout the state which have very small populations. The state was not equally distributing funding. They were using, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and they were taking money from city kids to give it out to the rest of the state. Over the last couple of years, the state has fully funded. The federal stimulus has been mostly responsible for that, but we are, even though you may be looking at your budget, shaking your head saying you don't have money, currently you're fully funded at 100% of your fair student funding, and you are fully funded from the state. So everybody really has the dollars they should have. Unfortunately, we had a lot of register loss from the pandemic. The city is holding you, at least initially, harmless for register loss over the past year. Unfortunately, it was the year before that, we felt that real register loss, when we first came back from the pandemic and the city instituted it. Over the past year, many schools have seen register gain, and they've seen gains also from the immigrant influx into the city as well. Okay. So really, in terms of budgets, programming, and vision, it's all about what do you believe, how will you drive it, and what we look for in our budgets: the planning, the programming, the initiatives, the staffing. These are the things that we look at: the professional development, the supplies, the vendors, etc. And I'm going to pause for a minute. I wanted to wait to tell you all of these documents. I mean, you could keep a pen and paper next to you if you want to take some notes, but all of these documents are downloadable in the chat. So they're in the chat for you. There's also a form to fill out in the chat to mark your attendance for the workshop. So you can just, while I'm speaking, you can click on and fill out the form. You'll have everything that I'm showing you today. So that's in the chat. And then at the end, we'll have a survey, but I'll remind you of that about 5 minutes from the end. Okay. All right. So funding for FY24. So all the schools have 100% of their fair student funding. The biggest impact is really the FY23 register loss. So last year, that's 22-23, the year that just passed. At the beginning of the year, we felt that huge register loss. But for 24, they're holding us harmless, but they're holding us harmless for any students you lost last year going into this year, okay? Not from the beginning of the pandemic, okay? There is no surplus rollover of funds. They didn't allow us to roll surplus funds this year. The federal money, to a large degree, is still intact. And this year, there's 2 new weights for all these students, all the immigrant students who have been coming into New York, that will give some additional funding to schools with the highest need as these students are coming in. Okay. So for 23-24, allocations and impact, again, we went with fair student funding 100%. Register loss, so we're being held harmless for the student weights, and we're going to go over what those are in a little bit. But we're not sure what's going to happen with the mid-year adjustment. And that's for all the needs weights. The city did not commit to holding schools harmless yet for the needs weights. Okay, so you're funded at 2 different points, and we'll talk a little bit about that. You're funded on October 31st for the bodies in the building. You are then funded at the end of December 30th, whatever's in your building, for all the needs weights. That's your special ed funding, that's your ESL funding, that's your funding for need. So that's all at the end, okay, of December. That's the piece yet that the city hasn't committed to holding you harmless for. Okay, so there could still be a bill coming in January. And again, if you have registered growth or you increase in your populations, your needs populations, you will get additional money at the mid-year. The special ed initiative is always an impact. I mean, it's no longer the initiative, it is special ed. But again, the funding for students rather than classes continues to have an impact on schools, increased salaries. And this is one that's really important. And if you have a pen, I really want everybody on this call to take notes and look at their budget. The initial para funding coming into the schools using your FSF funds, using your fair student funding. So when you go into your budget, you need to look at your paraprofessionals section. Everybody, before they went to their initial budget meeting, everybody's paras were funded with fair student funding. This is something that wasn't done before. basically the city would fund you with para money that wasn't there yet. And over the course of the year, as the money came in, the city would swap the funding out. What this is forcing you to do is it's forcing you to do your para reconciliation now rather than in September and October. When you have your budget meetings, if you've already had your budget meetings, you need to make sure that all of your fair student funding outside of 2 cases, there's 2 times that you pay with your fair student funding. You pay when it's a 12 to 1-to-1 class because it's built into the formula. And you pay when it's a para who is in the first year with a student as crisis. Okay, so those are the 2 times that you definitely pay. There may be other cases, but those are the ones that are definitely on you. Outside of that, they should be paid for by the city. You need to get those funds released. It may mean that you have to put paras into excess, okay? But remember, when paras go into excess, they don't just go to other schools. There's going to be a reconciliation. Even when we do para reconciliation, for those of you who have been principals, they haven't done it for a number of years. This way, at least, the real way. It seems like they're going to go back to the old way of doing it pre-pandemic now. But when you put paras into excess, then the district begins to look at where the vacancies are, and I'll assume that they'll begin moving paras around, but they're going to report to you day 1. I can't imagine that they're moving anybody. But the reason you need to put them into excess is because you will not have money to do your hiring if you need to do additional hiring. If you're good, if you have some people who are funded, you have everything you need to start up the year, you can leave it alone. And then talk to your budget person and get moved. But if you need to add a coach, or you want to purchase some materials, or you want to do anything else, and you need that money freed up, you need to advocate for it. You need to speak to your budget person. And if in the end that does not work out, you can loop in your superintendent. If you're still not getting any results, you can loop in CSA, call one of your field representatives, people out in the field for your CSA team, and they will advocate on your behalf as well. But it is very, very important that the reconciliation is done. And it's very difficult at the elementary level because you have kindergarten kids coming in who may need paras who are not on your T of O yet. I'm sorry, not on your T of O, who are not enrolled in your school yet fully, right? Because they're fully enrolled the first day. There are some ways to do it within the functions, but you need to reach out to your budget person and say, I need to get these people off. I see that Danielle just put up her hand. You can unmute for a second. Go ahead, Danielle.
Hi, Christopher. So I'm glad you brought up about the paras. I'm a middle school, and I have many paras that come in with the kids coming in from 5th grade into 6th grade that have paras. So because last year they had to give me a lot of funds for these, they this year took a tremendous amount of money and put it, like you said, towards the paraprofessionals. Am I going to get that money back if I don't understand?
So you need to
I need these paras. They're not going to be accessed.
You need to speak with your budget person, your AZ. If they have IEPs, you're going to get the money. The problem is all your money right now is tied up in these kids.
Yes.
So you need to write to your superintendent. You need to copy the superintendent. You don't have to write to the superintendent. Copy the superintendent and write to your budget person and your AZ, whoever your AZ is in the district, and let them know that you need your funds released, that these kids have IEPs and you need them released. If they can't release them, the money, you need these people put temporarily into excess so that your money is released to you so you can spend it, and then they'll advocate to get the money for you for the students, and you can then put the money back in. But if you're not, I'm afraid that if people aren't complaining and aren't voicing a concern, that they're not going to get their money.
Yeah, I'm at a deficit because of it. They took all that money. They took hundreds of thousands and put it into that. Okay,
so
thank you so much.
Yeah, you have to do that. And if that's not working, reach out to your CSA rep in the district that you're in, okay?
Thank you so much. Thank you.
No problem, Danielle. I see somebody else has their hand up, but I'm going to try to minimize the hand, so I'll take one more question. Go ahead, unmute.
Just on the paras, it's my understanding in the past, anything 0.5 and above, we were fully funded, and that has changed this year. And I'm gonna be honest, it's decimated my budget. I lost 2 out of classroom positions because all my paras are funded at 0.8. So I'm paying $8,000 a para for my 21 paras. And it's a huge impact on my budget. And that's the way previously the AZ for our district had told us to write our IEPs, so you didn't have to cover for lunch and hire an additional staff person. Is anything going to be done about that change in the funding formula?
Again, I know that, so I wish I had the power to do that. I'm just a principal like you are, so. I know the 0.8 paras is a problem too. I know that, you know, they are looking at it at least. I would again reach out to the AZ. Send an email to, when you send it to your AZ and your budget person, copy in your superintendent to let them know the concern, because this is a massive hit to schools. The para piece is a big problem. And, you know, especially if the AZ was the one advising to do this. And again, I would again reach out to your CSA field staff, let them know the concern, because as those concerns come in, that gets bumped up. I know that it is on the radar for CSA as well. And that they have been speaking to the people who've designed the budgets, because this is problematic on top of everything else we have to do to get the schools closed and start up over the summer. The last thing we have to worry about is all of our money tied up in paras, right? All of our fair student funding money tied up in paras. So I'm going to keep moving through with this because I want to get to everything, but yes, it's on the radar. Yes, you should advocate for it. And yes, you should, if you're not getting any satisfaction, you should make CSA aware. Okay. Okay, so fair student funding, you have your foundation weights, your grade weights, your student need weights, your programmatic allocation weights, hold harmless, which is what we're getting from the city this year for register loss. And then you have your categorical funding, the funding outside of fair student funding, which is state money, federal money, and private money. Foundation weight for every school is 225. That's 225,000 that they get up front. Then the rest of the funding is through grade weights based on students on the grade levels. Need weights, that's that October date, the October 31st date. Need weights, which is the end of December, they calculate that, the needs weights based on student needs. And then there's the enhanced weights for students in portfolio high schools. Okay. Basically, the city has been crushing everything into fair student funding over the past few years. It's been many years to give principals more flexibility in spending. The only issue I have with that is it's hard to see whether you're losing or gaining money when the money is changing categories. Okay. Around February, March, register projections for the new year. They've been pushing that up this year. It was like December that we were asked to do our register projections. And again, these are the dates for the funding cutoffs. Average teacher's salary. Okay, when is it calculated? What is the impact? So I want to go through this first. I kind of did a little chart for you, made it fast. If you're a school in 2021 with 8 teachers, you have 5 senior teachers, 3 newer teachers. You add up the salaries, 780,000 divided by 8, and it would be 97,005. What's the effect of accessing? Long-term effect on a school. So you can see the impact. If you start accessing out teachers, if you lose 2 teachers in 21-22, come 22-23, your average teacher's salary in this formula is going to jump from 97.5 to 110. If you keep accessing and you only have senior teachers left, the next year it goes to 120. So it actually becomes a cycle of decreased spending power, right? It's sort of like what's happened when we go shopping in the stores with meat, right? You go in there and the steak that was, you know, $6.99 is now $9.99. That's what's happening to you. So you have the same amount of money in your wallet from year to year, but the cost keeps going up. And when you start accessing, this is why schools, you know, like I said, this is what has turned fair student funding, which was promoting equity, into something that's just destroying equity across the city. Okay. Hiring impact. We don't, I should have put a question mark. We don't have a hiring freeze in place this year. There is no hiring freeze. We've had hiring freeze in the past couple of years. Open market transfers. Remember, open market transfers come with the cost of their salary. I'm not against open market, but I'm just reminding principals, make sure they're worth their weight. So if you're going to take a senior person who's going to cost you, because everybody comes at average, but the next year, the impact is you're paying their actual salary. That's how it impacts on your budget. So make sure if you're going to hire somebody who's very senior, carrying a top salary, that they're worth their weight, that they're a coach or somebody who's going to bring something to your school that's going to really move it. Okay.
Is that for 1 year or all years?
So the first year, you're paying for them at your current average teacher salary. But once they're on your T of O, they're captured in February, it's their real salary that's the impact. So you are going to have their salary impacted, and you actually pay everybody at actual. Average salary means that you're paying everyone at their actual salary. You're just averaging it out. So that impact will be there. It's going to actually cost you 2 new teachers for 1 senior teacher the next year, and that's for all the years going forward. Okay. Senior teachers are expensive. Newer teachers are cheaper. It's just the way it is. Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Are you saying there's a shift that we're no longer paying average teachers?
No, what I'm saying is when you pay average,
Right.
average is the average of all your actual salaries. So after the first year, that actual salary is what you're paying. It's having a higher impact on your, so your average, I'll give you an example. If you pay 50,000 for a teacher or 100,000 for a teacher.
I pay 103.
Okay, but let's say, no, I'm talking for a new teacher, 50 versus 100, okay?
Right.
And your average teacher's salary, you have 100 teachers on your T of O, all right? The impact of that new teacher of that senior teacher may only raise your average teacher salary $500. But that's $500 times the 50 teachers you have to purchase. So that's $50,000 impact to your overall budget. Had you hired the new teacher, you wouldn't have that impact, because when they average it out, you would have an even amount on your average.
Okay, so it's the impact on the average teacher
So
salary.
the impact on the average teacher's salary means you're actually going to pay the additional dollars on that person after year 1.
Got
Okay.
it.
All right. So, and then there's the ATR pool, which has been dissolved, but I know last year we have excess now that's kind of being pushed into schools. Superintendents need to clear the excess, right, within districts.
I have a question about that. So
Sure.
where could we, so we're looking at a candidate at open market with, let's say, 10 years experience. Where can I find her actual salary?
You can find it right on the UFT salary chart if you go to the UFT website.
Oh, just go by the chart. Okay.
Yeah, you could just go by the chart. But again, I wouldn't be as concerned about that. I'd just be concerned that, you know, if you have the money, great, but just make sure they're great people. Make
Right.
sure that they're going to have a huge impact on your school. Okay.
Excellent.
Special ed reform, this is a tough one for schools. And I know we're all battling it because, you know, we have those budget people who are saying, make it 3 grades, make it 4 grades. You know, you don't have enough. It's unconscionable to go 3 grades, to have a teacher trying to teach 12 to 1-to-1s or 12 to 1s across 3 grades. You know, you're going to have to advocate and fight hard to try to keep it at a maximum of 2. But it is, again, that burden of funding, it becomes on you. It's very, very difficult for principals right now, myself included, to run a class with 4 students or 5 students. You know, and again, the city is fine with you doing it if you're paying for it. But if you're in a budget hole and, you know, they have to come up with the funding, they have to make your budget work, they're going to ask you to combine. I'm just telling you, think about what's best for kids. And is it really, you know, is it really something that's going to work to have a 2nd grade student doing a 2nd grade curriculum in a classroom with a kindergarten student, doing a kindergarten curriculum? Is that too much of a leap for a classroom teacher? I think it is, but that's up to you to decide. But I would advocate for the kids, because budget people are budget people. They're not educators. So you need to advocate on the educational end. Okay. The RSNR, and I know I have middle school principals on, and this is more for the middle school principals, elementary as well. I've attached a PowerPoint on how to go through. So when you download on the chat, there's a download for the materials. There's like a 7-slide PowerPoint. It's like RSNR for dummies. It's like, you know, it's one of those books where it takes anybody who goes on, if they have no experience on ATS, they can bring it up and they can look at it. What it allows you to do is it allows you to see your students and how they're funded. A lot of times as kids come from elementary to middle, you know, all the systems are supposed to talk CSIS to ATS to it doesn't work. It still hasn't gotten there yet. There's still errors. You need to have somebody run that report early for you in like September, October, and then you need to begin to reconcile that, make sure that your kids are in the correct categories so that you're getting the correct funding at the mid-year. That number isn't going to be captured until the end of December. So really get your teams on it in September, October, and let them reconcile it. That's, you know, there isn't anything you can do about the L students. You could just look at them, make sure they're under the right service code. But for special ed, make sure they're in the right program and they're listed correctly so that you get your correct funding. There's a lot of middle schools out there that this wreaks havoc with, and they don't even know they're losing the money. Just make sure you make the corrections. It's not making corrections in your CSIS program. You're going to run CSIS and have your special ed program sit with the secretary and just make sure all the kids are in their correct programs, so that you get your funding come December 31st. Okay. Just some quick little points on here. The budget liaison's there to help you make changes in Galaxy. If you make a mistake, they can correct it. Okay, you know, they have the ability to correct things. Always schedule your dollars in any remaining categories. Unfortunately, the budget people are really about you having your money scheduled, not about maximizing any dollars or doing anything to work with you in terms of creative programming, or in many cases, not even looking at how you're spending your money. Okay, and I am going to say for the Title I schools out there, and most of you at Title I, unless you desperately need materials during the summer, you should wait until September 1st to buy your materials. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about that because Title I funding begins in September. You really want to use if you're buying materials, anything in OTPS other than personnel services at the bottom of your budget, you don't want to do that until after September, because that's the stuff that has no fringe cost. Okay, personnel has fringe costs, so you want to make sure that you're spending that money come September 1st. For those of you who are not Title I, you have to spend that money according to the rules of expenditure. Okay, but for for Title I schools, we're conceptually consolidated, and I'll talk more about that later. If you're given extra money, don't spend it. You know, this year they're going to hold us harmless on register projections, but I would still say, think about reserving a little bit of money because we don't know about the mid-year. And what I mean by that is if you're short on, you're going to run that RSNR report. You're going to see how many special ed students you have, how many L students. You're going to take a look and you're going to know if you're going to owe money come the mid-year or if you're going to get money come the mid-year. Reserve the money, set it aside if you think you're going to owe money. It's just not worth being in a position where, you know, the budget person is combing through your budget, trying to cancel out programs and stuff to find the money for the city. Don't forget dollars for prep period coverage when you're doing things. Pre-plan for new programs you intend for the budget. And when you do that, we're talking about supplies. We're talking about any consultants. We're talking about, you know, teachers for the programs, per session, per diem, professional development, any of those things you're going to have to purchase. Think about that. Try to be a little proactive and figure all those expenses. A lot of times we say, oh, we're going to do this new program we just bought. And in this case, the city's providing the professional development around the core curriculum. But if you're buying anything else to go with it, you know, you're going to have to, and even the city's core curriculum piece, think about, you know, what type of coverages you're going to need in the building if it's not provided for. Some funding sources that are held by the Borough Support Center or by your district, mandated services, counseling and speech, your SBST and AP, PT, Title IV drug, all those positions are done by the district, not by you. Just be aware your part-time teachers, and I'm talking about the itinerants, people who serve in your building and other buildings. Those are people who can't be accessed out or laid off. That has to be a discussion with the district because it impacts other schools. So you can't put them into removals. If you have to access, you need to speak to someone. Remember that removals cost money. So if you're sitting there on your budget and you're saying, oh, I need to move these paras out because I don't have them, and you put them into removals, the funding is still going to be there for fair student funding. You're not getting your money back immediately. Okay. That's something that needs to be reviewed by the district and by central. And then if they see that the person is truly in excess, and that goes for teachers as well, once they've reviewed the budget, then they will release your money. When it comes to teachers, they're not going to release that money if you have the money to pay for them. Okay, so, just don't think that you can put people into excess if you feel like you don't need them. Okay. All paraprofessionals must be linked to a student. And that's, if you haven't done it and gone into Galaxy, the para reconciliation process, and I'm going to harp on this because this is the big one. This is the one that's impacting schools, and many principals don't even realize that that's the reason their budget is upside down. So much of the fair student funding is tied up in those paras. And the only way to get the fair student funding back is to link a para to a student. Okay, once you link the para up and you can show that that para is now working with the student, then and only then can you swap the funding out if you have funding in your fair student, in your AC totals for para funding. And once you run out of the para funding, that's when you have to speak with your budget people about putting in an appeal and working around some of these problems that people are facing with the 0.8 para allocation, that they're only funding at 0.8, and the additional issues with students who aren't yet in the school building or aren't active in ATS yet because they haven't shown up for the first day, and they're going to need paras. Okay. So when planning, if possible, I know people are going to shake their head because it's not possible in most cases, calculate 8 days of absence for staff members. Indicate on the program the number of days that you have. So I know we put dollars in, but it just makes it easier when you're done allocating, $60,000 towards subs. Look, when you set that in your edit item, it'll tell you how many days that is, and you can type in under program the number of days. It just makes it easier for you as you're looking at your budget throughout the year. If you see half your money spent and it was 80 days, you have 40 days left. Right. So it makes it easier, especially as you get to the mid-year and you're trying to figure out how much money you need till the end of the year. Calculate the number of hours for each per session title. Okay, so you want to look at your per session, you want to do number of hours, and you want to put that number of hours on the program. It also helps you from year to year. You can actually type in 10 teachers, 4 hours, 40 hours. 10 and if you want to do it differently, you could put in 10 teachers, 4 days, and then put in 4 hours. So it's 10 times 4 times 4, right? So you can actually put down that you need 160 hours total. And then when you're programming for the next year, you can go back to the previous session and you can look on the program, and it'll actually be typed in there for you exactly what you had the previous year. So just a little pre-planning trick for the next year so that you can remember how many teachers you hired, how many days the program was, and how many hours each session was. So you get an idea of how much money to allocate for the next year. Funding other than TL has the
Excuse
cost of,
me.
yeah.
Where did you say to put that? I was distracted.
So
I hadn't delivery.
you'll see under program, as you put into OTPS, into per session per diem, there's a little program. It says optional. You can actually type in. So you have the ability to just type in 141 days. If you go past the, I don't know how many characters, 12 characters, it'll keep allowing you to type. And when you put the mouse on it, it'll show everything you typed. So it's just a trick for the next year and it's a way for you when you look at the budget, if you have someone else do the budget and they put the number of days or the number of hours, if it's per diem days or hours in the per session activity, you know how many hours you have left. You know how many days you have left. So it makes it easier for you as the principal to view it and see it. Okay.
Yeah, that's good, Chris. That's a good tip because in some instances we overspent lines without
Right.
realizing.
And you don't want to do that. So we don't want to do that.
Because they don't talk to each other. What I see in Galaxy is not what's coming out with Procession. They don't catch up.
But it does catch up, but sometimes it takes a day. So, and it's a problem because people are entering payrolls and they just end up going over budget. You should have for every activity, you should have a folder so that way they keep track of the hours, and you should have a line in Galaxy that matches. It just makes it easier. I know it's a lot more lines. For the budget person, it's not as easy. For the payroll person and for the principal, it's a lot easier because you can actually see everything in front of you. Okay.
Okay,
So I would recommend that.
okay.
So Galaxy only commits without fringe unless you check the little box that says include fringe. So remember, and that's where people also go over budget. They're not looking at the fringe line. So if you're paying for something with Title I, with anything other than TL, there's a fringe cost. So they say, oh, I put 50,000 in there. But with the fringe cost, it's not worth 50,000. It's 46,000. So they get to 48,000 and they're now over budget, or 49,000, they're over budget. All right, so just be aware of that as well. Okay, I'm going to take us out of the share for a second. I wanted to go over, before I take any questions, I did want to just go over some things in terms of tips and tricks. So I'd like to change my view on this and talk to you about fringe costs and some of the stuff that I've given you in the packet. So I'm going to I just have to take us out of, or myself out of this PowerPoint.
Question, how is the new funding formula based on the new contract working?
Our funding formula currently is based on the previous contract, just so you're aware of that, because the new contract wasn't in place. We're not going to know the impact until that contract's signed and what that means to schools. Right now, that contract has not been ratified yet. When it's ratified, I'm sure that the city will have to adjust for anything that's an additional cost to schools. I'm certain that CSA will be advocating if there's anything that has a negative impact on schools as we go forward. I'm going to just share my screen. I want to show you a couple of the things that I've given you with this workshop and a little talk. So let me open up. So you should be seeing my screen. So this is the RSNR piece that's there for you. It's a slide. I think the slides are just loaded in, but like I said, it'll take your secretary or anybody through it to see exactly how to use it and to check to make sure that all of your funding is correct in ATS and it matches up to what you have in your school building. I put in the student needs and weights for 2024. So this is the actual funding for your school. So every student in your building up here, the grade weights, this gray area that I'm highlighting, I just highlighted the two lines. That's K-5 and 6 to 8. That's your per capita funding per student. That's what you get for each student in your building, for every body that's in your building on October 31st. If they're on register October 31st, elementary schools will receive $42,237.38 per student. Middle schools will receive $4,576.72 per student. Okay. That's October 31st. After October 31st, here are your additional weights, your academic intervention weights, your poverty weights, your English language learner rates, okay, your special ed need weights, students in temporary housing weights, all right, and then portfolio schools, your specialized schools. So you really need to understand the impact of losing a student, or how much a student can actually cost, because it's not just the $42,037 in an elementary school. When you look at that and you say, well, that's an ICT student in kindergarten, well, that's an additional $8,848 on top of the $4,200. And if that kindergarten student is also an L, that's another $1,700 that's going to be tacked on approximately. So you're looking at an enormous impact to your budget with just a few students swaying in either direction. Okay. So when you talk about that RSNR report, if it's not capturing some of your students, it's going to be a big issue for your school. I mean, there have been schools that have lost thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. and have corrected it using the RSNR. So that's why I stress that so much. This is a good document to have just to be able to look at and see exactly what the cost is for your school. If you're down students or up students, you can kind of get an idea. I've also put in for special ed. This is just the percent of time, so you know what calculates as full-time special ed, what calculates as part-time special ed. This chart is provided in the Fair Student section of the DOE website. And I know I'm moving quickly through this, but I just want to kind of give you an idea of what's going on. So this is the cost rate for fringes, okay? The last time principals received anything on this was back in like 2009. So I actually kept the 2009 one here because I wanted you to see it. And I'm going to take that hand in a second, but I just want to finish this thought. So this is what the cost rate was, and you'll have an idea. I could probably blow this up a little bit. You'll see for per session per diem, it was 8.15%. For, I'm sorry, for per diem, for per session, it was 18.47%. For full-time teachers and principals, it was 38%, and for paras, it was 48%. Fast forward to 2023, the cost for APs, teachers, principals, 44.55%. The cost for paras, 65.13%. The cost for per session, 22.61%. And for per diem and F status, it stayed at 8.15. The reason is your subs don't really carry fringe benefits, right? But your per session is pensionable. Your paraprofessionals have a much lower salary, but they get the same benefits that everybody else gets, right? And they also get free schooling and release time. So that's additional funding that's in there. That's why it's so high for paraprofessionals. And then for teachers, APs, principals, 44.55%. So you want to use, if you're a Title I school, and I'm going to talk really quick because I got to keep moving through this. If you're a Title I school, you want to make sure you're conceptually consolidated. And what that means is your CEP talks about how you're going to spend your Title I dollars, and you have a plan for how you're spending your Title I dollars. But in your budget, Title I, Title II, Title III, all those items, and it's in the Fair Student Funding Guide, which there's a link to it in the PowerPoint. It is not up yet. It's still in process of being created. So it will be up over hopefully the next few weeks. In that guide, it talks about conceptual consolidation, all the categories. What that means is you have a plan for it on paper somewhere, how you're really using the money. But in Galaxy, that money is being used in the lowest fringe cost. So those monies, those reimbursable funds are being used in OTPS first. So all your supplies are being bought with Title I, Title II, Title III, right? And you're using your Fair Student Funding money where there are fringes in your personnel first. And then you're going to use it, if all your personnel is funded with Fair Student Funding, you're going to use it in the next most highest fringe, which is per session, okay? So your OTPS, your per diem, your F status, which is also 8.15, those are the things you want to use with your items that carry fringe, like Title I, Title II, Title III, okay? Those type of items, okay? Let me show you what else we have here. And then I just wanted to quickly go over some ideas and concepts, and somebody had their hand up. Go ahead, you can unmute.
Yeah, hi. Not to take too much time. Some of the information you showed just a few minutes ago regarding weights, that seems to be very similar, or I guess identical to what the snapshot shows. What is your experience with the accuracy and the usefulness of the snapshots that the budget director usually sends to us to give us an idea of where we are and where we might be regarding register loss per game?
I'm glad you brought it up. So what you should be doing, it's a tip sheet that they're sending you. And what that does is it shows you where you are and where you should be. If they're sending it to you that day, that they're loading it, it's going to be accurate, very, very accurate, very close. But you got to remember, your registers change daily. You have kids who discharge, kids who come in, but they can give you an idea of what your registers are. Just be aware that that initial tip sheet, if you get something from them and they're showing you where you are, at the beginning of the year, we have students who are no-shows. Those no-shows are being counted. So if you know that those kids aren't coming back, you got to get them off register before you get your accurate count, okay? But the tip sheets are good. That's, what they're doing is that math from those sheets that I just gave you, they're using that math. And that's the math that's being used to fund your budget. So I hope that helps, okay? So they are accurate, but they're only accurate from the time that they run it, okay?
One last thing, real quick. It just, when you started going over the fringe for the different categories, are you suggesting not to use funds that have high fringe to fund teachers? Or
right, you want to avoid
administrators?
personnel. That's only if you are Title I. If you're not Title I, you're not conceptually consolidated. So you have to spend it as it's laid out. So you're using Title III strictly for Ls, you're using Title I strictly for supplemental, you're putting in for your professional development and stuff, you're putting it, if you're staffing a coach with it, you're paying the coach. But if you're a Title I, which most of the city is, and you're a school-wide program, which everybody who's not first year Title I is probably school-wide program, you'll fit under the category of conceptually consolidated. So it's just smart to budget your money that way. And unfortunately, the budget people get you to zero and they don't look at maximizing the dollars. Okay, so I want to take you through a couple of initiatives. If you have no money, you're going to have to start getting creative. So one way to get creative is to do like a mainstreaming initiative. And real short, real quick, the goal of every special ed student should be to get out of special ed. Okay, we as principals, regardless of what the disability is, we have a responsibility as educators to make sure that disabled peers interact with mainstream non-disabled peers at some point in their career, right? Because at some point they're going to graduate out of our schools and they're going to have to interact in the real world with people who are not disabled. So we want to give them an opportunity. And what I say to principals is, where is the best opportunity for children to be mainstreamed? Is it in reading and math? No, right? It's in the other areas that we have. It's in the areas of art, music. It's where we have all of our prep coverages, right? The question always is, can I do this? Is it legal? Won't I get kickback from my teachers? What I would tell you is, if you put it on the IEP, it's a mandate. So if you say your children will be mainstreamed during, and you list your cluster coverages, or if you're in a middle school, you talk to your teachers about where children would benefit from being mainstreamed. And again, it would probably be in gym and art, where they would most likely find the most success of interacting with their peers. You could do a mainstreaming initiative. This is just a quick way of how you can save some money in your budget and do what's best for kids. So here's a mainstreaming initiative through common planning. So if I have 5 classes on the grade, I've kind of got it on the screen here: 501, 502, 503, 504, 505. If I common prep the grade, first period on Monday, third period on Tuesday, first period on Wednesday. It should actually say period 5 here. I apologize. I'm going to change that right now. Period 5 on Thursday and period 3 on Friday. I take the children in my 12 to 1-to-1 class. I assign students A, B, and C to 501. I assign students D, E, and F to 502, students G, H, and I to 503, and students J, K, and L to 504. If I know I have the students who are a little antsy, or the child with the para, if I'm a 12 to 1-to-1, I'm going to put the para with that group of 3 children. Each day before the prep, a couple of minutes before the prep, the teacher and the para walk the kids past the rooms and drop the students off. Each day after the prep, the para and the teacher come around and collect the students. What that does is it means that you don't need to provide coverage to the teacher in 505, because the teacher's class is completely covered because they're with other classes. And that puts a 0.2 back into your budget, right? For each, if you have 5 classes and you do this, you'll need 1 less cluster coverage to do all of your coverage for your school building. So this is a way to recoup money. If you have teachers leaving, it's a way to recoup. Another initiative that you can do to recoup money. I mean, I know that our middle school people, our high school people, they know the rule with phys ed, right? So the rule with phys ed is in elementary, everything defaults to 32. If it's not a classroom teacher, if not specifically outlined, it's 32, it's maximum class size. In the middle school physical education, it's 50-1. And the reason it's 50-1 is in middle schools, they're able to do in those large gyms, 3 classes with 2 teachers at the 50-1 ratio. Okay, because 33 is the maximum class size. That's 99 with 3 classes, and they do it. What I'm going to tell you is if you're in a situation where you're now at a point where you're accessing people, it means class size is going up somewhere in your building because you're losing teachers off of grades. And I will tell you, if you're elementary, even if you're middle, you can have a conversation with your union rep, with your teachers, that if you have large spaces in your building, a gym, and I always say, look, if you're going to do something, 3 questions. Does it make sense? Is it safe? And is it what's best for kids? And those 3, ask them in that order. The first question is always, does it make sense? And by does it make sense, if I told somebody who wasn't an educator, I'm doing this, would they go, huh? You're doing what? And if they're going, what? Don't do. Because sometimes when we're doing what's best for kids, we start to justify things that don't make sense, or we overlook safety. So 2 is safety, 3 is, what's best for kids. So, children don't get enough physical education. We're signing off on 130 hours, very hard to get that 130 hours. You should think about doubling up the gyms with the teacher. You should think about, all of us with the art surveys and stuff, it's hard to meet those requirements from the state on the arts, right? Think about if you have a large art room, a large auditorium where you could do music in the auditorium, doubling up classes. The issue becomes safety around that, right? So who in your building is most equipped for handling large groups of students? Who is doing your busing, your lunches, your lineups? It's your school aides. You don't need a pedagogue, a second pedagogue to be there. You need somebody there in case there's an issue or a problem. If you speak with your union reps and you talk about the fact that class size is going up, and I know in elementary, the classroom teachers outnumber the clusters because it's a little different, 5-1. And there isn't an elementary teacher and there isn't a teacher in the middle school who thinks that the art teacher or the phys ed teacher has the same workload that the English teacher has, or the social studies teacher grading papers. And if they have the opportunity to vote through an SBO and it's only 55% to increase the number of students in the classes, that is a way that you can kind of mitigate some of the cuts and some of the things happening. So I apologize. That was my alarm just to tell you that in the chat, there's going to be a survey at the end of this. I know I'm moving quickly and there's a lot more that I could tell you and a lot of other tips and tricks, but we're going to run out of time. So I'm going to keep going, but in the chat, please fill out that survey. You can bring it up while I'm talking if you like. If you'd like budget workshops, Eli runs them. I do budget workshops. If you need support in your school with the budget, they have people to support you in the school. In the chat, just type in that you'd like some additional or a longer workshop on this or help at your school level on this. You could type it right into that survey. I hope that this has been beneficial as I continue to go through things with you. Let me just bring up the next slide that I wanted to show. Okay, I wanted to just bring this up. Let me blow it up. Okay. Another thing you can do to reduce costs, think about your programs, the program lengths that you run programs and stuff. So if you're seeing a cut this year, just an example of a Saturday Academy program in 22-23, you had 4 hours, a 4-hour session from, let's say, 9 to 1, 8 sessions, 10 teachers, 1 administrator, 8 a.m. to 12 noon, teacher per session hours, 320. You might want to look at it and say, I'm not going to get rid of the program, but I want to cut that cost by half if I can, or get it down. I don't have the funding I had. Well, you might want to think about running the Saturday Academy for 3 hours with teachers. So starting it at 8:30, because you lose a lot of time. You always have those snacks and breakfast for the kids coming in. So that initial half hour from 8:30 to 9, have an administrator and a school aide there. The school aide to help give out the lunches, and administrator to oversee the breakfast. And that will save you, basically that half hour with the teachers, and, reduce the program only by a half hour. If you reduce it from 8 days to 6, because you're thinking about the tests, because that's what most people do with Saturday Academy, they put it around testing. If you really look at the calendar, there's a lot of holidays in there, and it's hard to get staffing on those holiday weekends. So you might be able to do it just reducing 1 day. So what you've taken out of the program is a lot less, but you've half the cost, okay? And that's school aid costs next to nothing to bring in, compared to teachers and to principals. So again, think about your F status AIS. If you have F status people in your building, unless they're 3 days, which means that they need benefits for the whole year, you might want to think about starting them a little later. Do you need them there September? When you first start up, usually you don't know who needs to be serviced. Think about starting them in October, starting them in November. It's a way to reduce the cost. Instead of ending them in June on the last day, by the last day, there's so many activities going on in June. It's very hard for them to service children and pull them out from those activities. You may want to think about ending it in May. You may want to think, if you're doing testing and you're using some test sophistication with them, getting kids ready for Regents, getting kids ready for any of the other tests, ending them when the tests come. Okay, so that will save you cost. Just remember that if you drop an F status person below 2.5 days, they lose their benefits. Okay. And I know that we're hard pressed, and we're pressed right to the next, because you have to go to another session. I've got it at 2 minutes to 10. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I tried to squeeze 3 hours into 1 hour, and I know that I have not covered half the things that I should cover with you, especially on the tips and tricks. The only other thing I'll tell you, since I got 1 minute left, is, work with your PTA, make sure that you don't control funds. You shouldn't be tied up in their funding. But if they're making $5,000 on a candy sale, and there's schools in your district where you hear the PTAs are making $20,000 or $10,000, just suggest to your PTA to hook up with that person, or have your parent coordinator call up to the other school and see what they're doing to rock it. If they have the same population, there may be some parties or incentives that they're doing. It's just a way to raise money for the school. Think about that. Don't forget to apply for those Reso-A grants every year. Okay. You got to put in those applications year in and year out. And with that, 10 o'clock hour. So I want to thank everybody. And I want to wish you a wonderful start to the school year and a great summer. All right. Any questions?
Hey, Chris, thank
Yeah.
you so much. Quick question. If you had said a few times to CC your CSA rep, if you're not getting answers from your budget person or you feel like you're hitting a wall, who are we CCing exactly?
So I know that there's a bunch of those reps out there, but I know for Staten Island and South Brooklyn, it's Jim Harrigan. I know that Reggie's out in Queens. We have Frank in the Bronx. We have, give me a second. I'm trying to think of all.
Brooklyn North, do you know who's
Wanda?
that?
Yeah, and there's any of them, even the assistant directors. You don't have to necessarily know. And they'll let the field directors know, and the field directors will let Central CSA know. And then, they'll advocate on your behalf also with the chancellor. Okay, because I know this is a big problem.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. And I dropped the field service link from CSA in the chat for you, Chris.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
All right, take care. Thank you again.
Thanks, Chris. Have a great day.
Enjoy.
Chris, are you still on?
I'm on.